Then we have disaster risk reduction policy and planning. You see, I mentioned this just a few days ago to one of my colleagues, one of my colleagues in disaster risk reduction and disaster management. Sometimes what we think is policy is not really a policy in the way we look at policy science. We often what we have are policy statements. They said this is what we should do. This is a recommendation. It's a policy recommendation. But you see, policy science looks into the issues. And where you might identify one issue, then we have to start looking at it comprehensively and say, what are other related issues? What are the other issues involved here? And it's not only to identify the issue, but we have to define them. And then we look at that, we model them and say, well, how are different people affected differently? What is the impact of various issues?
To me, Dr. Narayan, the design of any good policy must first take into consideration its impact on people.
Yes.
Any good policy. If it's not impacting people positively, if it's not beneficial to people, if it's not contributing to the human development of people, because that is the most important thing, human development, then you should scrap that policy.
Yeah. And so when we start thinking of policy, how does it affect maybe the ecosystem of which we are a part?
Yes.
We are part of that. How does it affect the physical environment of which we are part? Because we interact, that interaction between, the chicken and egg thing we were talking about, who impacts the environment and how the environment impacts us and so forth. We need to look at it comprehensively. And then, so when we design a policy, we have to look at it comprehensively, but also we want to design it in a way with design features of implementation. Because you can have a really good policy and then nothing's happening and you're not getting the intended outcome, and you say something's wrong with the policy. And so maybe the policy was bad, but it's because we never looked at implementation. And so it hasn't really achieved its purpose. And then we go back and we make another policy, and we call those policy fiascos. Or we're just going through a cycle of policies and we're not really implementing anything. All right? So we need to look at that from that perspective. So want to look at that, the policy side of it, and then the final module, module 6, is in disasters and development. Now we have set up the foundation, and in there we will have assessments. We can assess risks, or we can map risks. We can assess all these things. We can map the risks and all of this, and we need to have foresight. That what if this scenario, what if this were to occur? How do we do? There are certain analyses you can do, all right? And I don't want to get into the models for that as yet, but there are certain, just like a cost-benefit analysis. There's one element in there which I don't often see in many of these cost-benefit analysis is nature. There's a percentage of consideration that needs to go into the state of nature, what it is now and what it can be when that occurs. So you put that in there in terms of cost benefit. But basically I'm saying in the assessments and so on, all of this needs to be, we can map all of this, and then still there'll be uncertainties, but at least we are working from a better position.